That's it, Mikagad I have.
Chaim. In this week's Parsha, Hashem gives a command to the Koyanim to be careful not to drink before doing their avodah. So the Medrash has a whole section, the Medrash Rabbah has a whole section discussing what happens when you drink too much. Nobody here has that problem, I hope.
No, we don't drink. You ever saw me drink? I don't think so. You ever saw me drink? I got two witnesses right here. Never saw me drink.
So Rabbi Acha comes along and tells over an interesting story. It was this guy, I don't know what his name was, what should we call him? Call him Baruch. Baruch the drunk. Baruch loved to drink wine. All day, every day he was drinking, right? Every penny he got would go for the wine. And came to a point where he had no more money. So he started selling dishes, furniture in his house to buy wine. Now his children, who are already grown up at this point, try to do an intervention. They try to bring him to AA meetings, but nothing really worked.
Which grade am I?
Baruch was too into the wine. They try to sit down and talk with him. They try to explain to their father how he's ruining his life, but Baruch wasn't interested in listening. So his children got together and they decided we have to do something. We have to get our father to realize what he's doing to himself. He's drinking all day. Not only that, they would walk in the street and they would see their father rolling around in the mud with the bottle of wine. And that's, first of all, terribly embarrassing. Also, he's getting into debt. They're going to have to pay off his debts later. So they had a meeting, his children, and they decided they have to do something to get their father to realize how serious the situation is. So what did they do? One day, when their father Baruch was very, very drunk, his children got together, they picked him up, and they took him outside of the city to the cemetery. At the edge of the city, there was a cemetery. They brought him to the cemetery, and they saw near the entrance to the cemetery, there was a freshly dug grave. So they took their drunk father, and they put him into the grave. And they said, listen, when he gets up and he realizes he'll see where he is, maybe he'll realize that he's digging his own grave. He'll realize it's a grave mistake. He realized that he's digging his own grave, and maybe it'll knock some sense into him. Okay, so they leave him in the grave and they walk off. The next morning, Baruch's still asleep, and a group of merchants are traveling by the road at the edge of the city. And as they're traveling, they suddenly hear horses in the distance, and they get nervous, right? Who are these horses? Perhaps it's bandits. Maybe it's the king's soldiers are coming. This is trouble for these merchants, right? They have a lot of their merchandise is they don't want the king's soldiers to discover it. So they look around. They see the cemetery. So they quickly unload their stuff and they put it right near the entrance of the cemetery, and they ride off. An hour later, Baruch wakes up, looking around. Where's his bottle of wine? He picks it up. It's empty. So he looks up and he notices right on top of the edge of the grave, he sees a barrel of wine. Wonderful, he says. He gets up, there's a faucet there. He opens the faucet, he starts to drink, and he goes back to sleep. He wakes up a few hours later, he takes some more to drink. 3 days go by, and his children are waiting for him to come home. Hopefully he learns his lesson. He'll come home with some sense knocked into him, but he's not coming. So they go to check up on him. And they come there and they see barrels of wine like laying at the right in the cemetery, right over the grave. And their father's sitting there drinking and singing. And one of them says to the other, if Hashem managed to bring him wine over here, there's no way we're going to knock any sense into him, right? So we obviously we don't want him to be rolling around in the streets. So we got to take responsibility, and we'll take responsibility to take care of him, and we'll switch off every day. Another one of us will take care of him and bring him some wine to drink, and that's what they did. This is the story. This is the story in the Medrash. Now, the obvious question when reading the story is what's the whole point of this medrash over here is to tell us how dangerous it is to drink wine and the terrible things that happen. So why does Rabbi Acha come along and tell us a story about how Hashem performed this tremendous miracle and gave this guy wine in the cemetery? What's the lesson that we're supposed to learn from this story? Why is the medrash telling us this story? If we look back at the history of the Jewish scholars of the great rabbinic families, one of the greatest rabbinic families in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, the family of the Nesiim, right? The family of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, of Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, was all started by Hillel Hazaken, the family of Hillel, right? Greatest, perhaps one of the most well-known Tanoim of the Mishnah. And the Gemara tells us, how did Hillel become so great? Right? The very famous story we're all familiar. When Hillel was a young man, he was very, very poor. He used to work hard every day. And he would earn a half a dinar after a full day of work. What would he do with the half a dinar? So he would take half of the money that he made, which is a quarter of a dinar, and he would give it to his wife, and he would say, you could do all the shopping with this quarter of a dinar. And the other quarter of the dinar, he would go to the Beis Medrash, and he would pay the fee, the entrance fee, the tuition to study Torah. That's what he would do. And of course, this was half of his income, right? Can you imagine spending half of your income to some? I mean, unfortunately, today there are people who have to do that also. It's Baruch Hashem, there's been a little bit of help with government funding, but it's still a lot of money. But this is not even for his children; this is for himself to learn. And this went on for a long time until one day, Hillel's having a hard time with Parnasa. He doesn't have any money. And he can't pay to go into learning. And he goes to the guard at the door and he says, I always pay. Could you let me in for free? And the guy says, absolutely not. So we all know how Hillel climbs up on the roof. It's heavy snow is falling, and he climbs up on the roof and listens in through the skylight. And he's able to hear the learning, and he's soon covered with snow. And the next morning, the people in Shul, the people in the Beis Medrash notice that the Beis Medrash is very dark. And they look up and they see a form of a person laying on the roof, and they ran out to get him. And of course, afterwards, they said he can come in for free. And Hillel then was able to come in and learn without paying, for free from then on. And he became one of the perhaps the greatest Talmid Chacham of his generation. Right? So it was the desire that he had for Torah. The fact that he was able to first of all give half of his income for Torah. The fact that when he didn't have the money, he was willing to climb up under the freezing snow and lay on the roof to listen to Torah. That's what makes a leader like Hillel. The Gemara in Chulin tells us a story of our Pinchas ben Yair, of an interesting journey that our Pinchas ben Yair took. Our Pinchas ben Yair once heard that there were Jewish captives that needed to be freed. So he quickly raised funds to free them, and he began to travel. It was, at a bit of a distance where they were. So he began his journey to free these captives through the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. And he's on the road. And he doesn't want to travel on his own, so he looks for other travelers. And he sees another Jew traveling down the road. And this Jew is on the way. It's before Pesach, and he's carrying wheat to make matzah. So he's traveling with wheat to make matzah, and then he notices another traveler on the road. This is an Arab. So they all join together and they begin to travel. And they come to a river, the river Ginoi. And this is at the end of the winter when the river all the winter rains had made the river swell. And it was too high to cross the river. So, Bar Pinchas' colleagues begin to look for a bridge. Bar Pinchas says, I have no time to look for a bridge. He turns to the river. And he says, Ginoi River, split so I can pass through. So the river looks at him, and the river, looks at him. The river turns to him, and says, who are you? And he says, I'm on my way to do a mitzvah, the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. And the river says, I'm also doing a mitzvah. Hashem gave me a mitzvah to flow. For the river to flow, I'm doing a mitzvah just like you. Why should your mitzvah take precedence to my mitzvah? Furthermore, your mitzvah, you're not 100% sure you're going to be able to fulfill your mitzvah, right? Who knows? It's a long trip. Who knows if you're going to be successful in your mitzvah? But I will be successful in my mitzvah. So my mitzvah might actually be greater than your mitzvah. So why should I split for you?
It ended up splitting. So why did it ended up splitting? Why did it probably will for sure will not? If it wants to, it's able to do it. Unless it chooses not to. Or even if he wants to, he might not succeed.
right? So Rav Pinchas ben Yair turns to the river and he says, if you don't split right now, I will decree that you should dry up and never flow again. The river is very scared. It immediately stops flowing, and Rav Pinchas ben Yair crosses the river. Rav Pinchas ben Yair's friend is standing there, and he's a little nervous. You know, he knows what happened when Pare tried to cross the river after the Jewish people, and the river water came after him. So he looks at Rav Pinchas ben Yair, and he's like, is it okay for me to cross? So Rav Pinchas ben Yair turns to the river, and he says, my friend is traveling to do a mitzvah. He has wheat to make matzah. You have to let him through too. Okay. His friend crosses, and the Arab standing there on the other side, and he's like, is it okay for me to cross? And Pinchas turns to the river, and he's like, it wouldn't be proper if we continue traveling without our traveling companion. It wouldn't be nice, so you have to let him through too. And the river waited until the Arab crossed over. And the Gemara comments on this, that this is, Pinchas ben Yair was so great that the miracle that happened to Moshe Rabbeinu and all 600,000 Jews happened for him, for his merits. So he continues his journey, and it's getting late. He has to find a place to stay. So they stop off at an inn. And there's a stable at the entrance of the inn where he puts his donkey. And he's getting ready to go to sleep. And the innkeeper comes running and he says, Pinchas, we have a little bit of a problem. We're trying to feed your donkey. He doesn't want to eat. And, we thought maybe it's a bit of a spoiled donkey. So we sifted the barley. We made sure it was clean. Not only that, we went through, we removed all the chaff. We made sure it was the highest quality barley. So Rav Pinchas ben Yair said, did you take trumas and maestros from the barley? I'm like, no. And he says, my poor donkey is traveling to do a mitzvah, and you're trying to get it to do an avera. Right? The Gemara questions this. You don't have to take meiser if you're giving barley to a donkey. And the Gemara says the barley was originally bought for people to eat, and then they decided to give it to the donkey, so it was already chayiv in trumas and meisers. Okay, the next morning, Rav Pinchas continues his journey, and he's coming to the city where he's supposed to free the captives. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi lives in that city. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi hears Rav Pinchas ben Yair is coming. He runs out to greet him. And he says, Rav Pinchas ben Yair, it's such an honor to meet you. I was wondering, perhaps you will agree to be my guest. He wasn't very confident because he knew that Rav Pinchas ben Yair, throughout his life, he never ate in somebody else's home. He never ate anyone else's bread.
He sent it to me today.
Right? He never wanted to eat somebody else's food. So he says, will you honor me by being my guest? So Rav Pinchas ben Yair says, of course, no problem. So Rebbe's face lights up, and he's like, really? I heard that you never want to eat by other people. And Ben Yair says, it's an honor to eat by another Jew. All Jews are holy. I would love to be a guest by another Jew. But there's a bit of a problem, he says. The problem is that many Jews can't afford to host guests. It's very difficult for them, right? And even if they do it, they're kind of doing it. They feel bad when they do it. It's difficult, and I don't want to pressure another Jew. And not only that, even wealthy people who could afford to bring guests, many of them are very stingy. And when they bring a guest, like eats away at them, that the guest is eating their food. I don't want to, that's called bread of an evil eye. I don't want to eat such bread. But you, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, you're extremely wealthy. You're the prince, the leader of the Jewish people. You have enough money and you're generous. I would love to be your guest. Excellent. So come to my house, says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Rabbi says, 1 second, I'm on my way to do a mitzvah. I can't stop off to be your guest. I'm going to go release the captives.
I get a bigger bowl.
I'm going to go release the captives, and then I'll come to your house. Excellent. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is waiting anxiously. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair goes, he redeems the captives, and he comes to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's house. As he's about to walk in, he notices white mules at the entrance of the house. He turns to Yehuda HaNasi and he's like, what? You expect me to eat in the house where the angel of death lives? White mules are very dangerous animals, especially in a city. They can injure people, they can harm people. I don't want to eat in such a house. So Yehuda HaNasi says, okay, I'll get rid of them. Fine, I'll sell them. I'll sell the mules. So says, sell them to somebody else? You want somebody else to do it? You're going to transgress the prohibition of Lifnei Iver, putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So Yehuda HaNasi says, okay, fine, I won't sell them. I'll abandon them. I'll leave them in the middle of the woods somewhere. Pinchas ben Yair says, that's even worse. You leave them alone on guard in the middle of the woods. Who knows what damage they can cause? So Yehuda HaNasi says, okay, fine. You know what I'll do? I'll remove their hooves. That way they can't, they injure people with their hooves. I'll remove their hooves. What? and they won't be able to injure anybody. Rabbi Yochanan says, you want to cause pain to animals?
I knew it.
Right? You want to innocent animals? You want to cause pain to them? Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, fine, I'll kill them. So he says that's a terrible sin of Baal Tashchis. So they're not kosher, right? The mules are not kosher. So Rabbi Yehuda is like, can you go to my house anyways? And Rabbi Yochanan is like, I can't come to a home with mules in it. Rabbi Yochanan starts to say, please come to my house. And suddenly the ground begins to shake and a mountain starts to rise out of the ground right between Rabbi Yehuda and Pinchas ben Yair, and they were separated, and Rabbi Yehuda Anasi wasn't able to plead to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair to be his guest. So that's the story that the Gemara tells us. So the obvious question that many people ask on the story, in the beginning of the story, is, a lot of times when you hear children are arguing with each other, and one of the children is losing the argument, so what do they do sometimes? They'll say, if I'll beat you up, or I'll punch you in the face if you say that, right? So it's known as the fallacy of appeal to, what is it called? Appeal to force, right? In Greek, it's known as appeal to the stick. What's the Greek word for it? Let me try to find it out. Argumentum ad baculum, right? Appeal to the stick, or in English, appeal to force, or might makes right.
Yeah.
Right? So, but obviously, threatening somebody doesn't actually win you the argument, right? It's not a logical argument. So what is Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair saying to the river? The river comes with a very logical argument to Rabbi Pinchas. It says, I'm doing a mitzvah and you're doing a mitzvah, and my mitzvah is better than your mitzvah. My mitzvah is something which I'm 100% sure I can fulfill, and your mitzvah, you don't know if you can fulfill the mitzvah. So what does Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair say? He threatens the river. That's the argument. Right? If you can't win either he has a logical answer to the river's question, or, right, you can agree that you lost the argument. What type of behavior is this to threaten the river? So there are many different answers that are given. Rabbi Yeshua Rekeach, the second Belzer Rebbe, known as Rabbi Shiela Belzer, explains that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was not just threatening the river. He was answering the river's question. The river's question to Rabbi Pinchas was, how do you know you'll succeed in doing your mitzvah? So Pinchas ben Yair says, how do I know I'll succeed? Because I will not let anything stop me. If there's a river in front of me that doesn't want to split, I will decree that the river should be dried up. I am willing to do whatever it takes to do this mitzvah. And that's why nothing will stop me. That's why I know that I will be successful. That is his answer to the river. And this explains Ray Dessler's what the Medrash is telling us with the story of, Baruch the drunk, right? This is what the Medrash is telling us with the story. The Medrash is telling us that a person who really wants something, and you want it for you, it's very important, and it's something that you really want, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Such a person, even if you're in a cemetery, in a grave in the cemetery, Hashem will send the wine, right? If you're, if it's something that's extremely important and you're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. So the Medrash tells us that Hashem leads a person in the way he wants to be led, right? So the Medrash is telling us that if you choose to be a drunk and you do everything you could to get your wine, so even if you find yourself in the middle of the cemetery in a grave, Hashem will figure out a way to get you your wine. And on the other side, obviously, and the lesson for us is that if we're a little smarter than Baruch, and instead of wanting wine, we want more important things, right? We want whiskey, or even better stuff than whiskey. We want Torah, we want mitzvahs. So if we really want it, even if it seems like it's impossible for us to achieve, that's what Hashem will give us. Chaim l'chaim. So the question becomes, how can you say such a thing? A lot of people want something and they don't achieve it, right? They don't get what they want. I know a lot of people who tried to get something and they didn't get it. So what is the Medrash telling us? That if you really want even wine, Hashem will give it to you. So when I was in Kfar Chabad, after I got married, I lived in Kfar Chabad for a year.
I was born.
Yes, you were born when we were in Kfar Chabad. So I farbringed once with a Rabbi Fischel Jacobs.
Oh, he doesn't live in Chabad.
What?
He's in Vermont. No?
10 years ago, he was in Kfar Chabad when I was there.
I think it's Vermont. The book, you know the book, Parshas, the big white one? Yeah.
I think he's now, I know 10 years ago he was living in Kfar Chabad. So,
I'll send you a picture to come.
What?
I'll send you a picture to come. I think it's...
So he's a rabbi. He's originally from America. He was at least 10 years ago. He was in Israel. He worked in the Israeli prison system for a period of time. And he's when he was young, he studied martial arts. Right? He does karate presentations.
10 years ago, he was in Israel.
Yes,
for a long time, or
at least for a few months. I don't know
No, I'm saying a long time before that, or you're not sure?
Well, I know he was in the Israeli prison system for like 10 years or so. I'm not sure what he wrote a book on Taras HaMishpach. He wrote many books.
So you know about it.
Yeah. So he was... So I went to one of his farbringens in Kfar Chabad, and he said over the following story. He said that this is when he was studying when he was studying whatever martial arts he was studying. So this is something that he was taught that they would tell new students who would come to learn. So they would tell him this story. It's not a story in Jewish sources, but this is a popular story amongst martial arts and I guess in other fields also. So there was this young student who came to his sensei or guru, I don't know what the correct word for it is. And, he was a young student and he says, I want to be successful. I want to succeed in whatever martial arts I'm doing. How can I ensure that I will be successful? So his sensei, his guru tells him, want to be successful? Meet me tomorrow at the beach. Meet me tomorrow morning at the beach, right? So, okay, he gets up early the next morning. He meets him at the beach. And his sensei tells him, I want you to go walk into the water. So he starts walking in. He walks until his waist. And he tells him, continue walking. So he continues walking. He walks up to his chest. Walk farther. He walks up to his neck. Walk even farther. He walks all the way out in the water with his nostrils. And his sensei is walking behind him. And suddenly, his teacher grabs his head and pushes it down under the water. Pushes it down under the water. He begins trying to lift his head up. But his teacher is stronger than him. And he can't lift his head. He can't breathe. So he tries to move the hand away. He can't get out. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. It's getting close to a minute. And he can't breathe anymore. He needs ear. So suddenly he jumps up. He throws his sensei through the ear. His sensei goes flying. And he gets up and he takes a breath of air. And his teacher looks at him after he went flying. He managed to get up and he looks at his student and he says, how did you do that? I was holding you down under the water. You powerful throw. You threw me so far. And he says, I needed to breathe. Right? When when you're desperate for oxygen, you're able to perform, I guess, superhuman feats of strength. So he says, that's the secret to success, he says. When you face a challenge, you have to look at overcoming the challenge the way you looked at oxygen right now, right? When you couldn't breathe and you knew that you needed to breathe in order to live, that's the way you have to look at every challenge that comes your way. You have to look at every challenge that you need to overcome and say, this is your oxygen. You cannot live if you don't overcome this challenge. And then you will be successful and you will overcome any challenge, whether it's in karate, any other form of martial arts, or any other challenges you face in life. In the winter, in 1912, the winter of 1912 was a particularly cold winter. It was one of the coldest winters ever recorded. The LA Times declared that the human race will have to fight for its existence against the cold in this winter. Right? That was actually the year when the Titanic was hit by a huge iceberg during that winter. So it was a very cold winter throughout the world. And in the city of Tzvas, in the middle of the winter, it was terribly cold. There were some big snowstorms. And during one particularly cold day, it was snow falling, And the people in the shul were, I guess, getting nervous. There was time for mincha, and there weren't a lot of people coming, right? It was dangerous for many people to come to go outside then. And the people, I guess, who lived right near the shul were able to come for the minyan, but we weren't sure if they would have a minyan that day. When they were looking outside to see if there were 10 people who would come, and they noticed the old rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov David, known as the Ridvaz, Rabbi Yaakov David Vilovsky, was coming. And he's coming through the snow, and he has a bottle of l'chaim, some cake with him, and he comes to the shul, and as soon as it was a minyan, he went to the amud to daven for the amud, and afterwards he asked everybody to gather around to say a l'chaim. It was his father's yahrzeit, and he looked very, very emotional, and the people told him, at that time he was about 67 years old. He was a year before he passed away. He passed away at the age of 68. And he was already it was very difficult for him to come in general to shul, especially during the cold. And people told him, what made you come out here? Of course, your father's yahrzeit, but it's a bit dangerous for someone of your age to come out in this cold. And he said, and also you look very, very emotional. What's going on? And he says, I'll tell you. When I was 6 years old, my parents were very, very poor. My father, Abzev, was very poor. He worked very hard. He had 6 children to feed, and it was very difficult. And one day, my teacher told my father that if he didn't pay tuition, he wouldn't be able to continue teaching his children. He wouldn't be able to continue teaching us. And my father was, of course, very upset, and I was very upset, right? I wanted to learn Torah. And that night, after my father came home from shul, from Erev, I heard my father talking to my mother. And he said that I was just in shul. And I heard that Zelig the Gvir, Zelig the rich man, is marrying off his daughter. And he's building a house for the young couple to live in. And there's a problem. The problem is that there's a shortage of lime, and they're not able to build an oven, a fireplace for the new house. And I asked around, and I see there's a bit of a shortage, and it's very expensive to build new ovens. So I asked, and I realized that if we to take our oven, right, if we dismantle our oven, take it apart, and bring it to Zelig, I could get enough money to pay tuition for the next half a year. And Yaakov David was a little boy at the time. I remember thinking to himself, it's the beginning of the winter. We're not going to have an oven. Now, an oven, by the way, is not like an oven for us today. An oven is a fireplace. It's meant to warm the house in those days. That was actually provided them warmth throughout the winter. It wasn't just for cooking. It was for heating the house. And he says, I remember thinking, it's the winter. What are we going to do without an oven? And then I realized that for my parents, our learning is much more important than heat in the winter. Right? Our Torah was so much more important to my parents. And sure enough, the next morning, my father took apart our oven. He brought it, he sold it, and we were able to continue learning for it. We had enough money to pay the tuition. And the next day, when I went to school and I started dozing off in class, I thought to myself, my father just sold his oven so that I could learn Torah. And I'm going to doze off. I'm not going to pay attention. And that was my attitude for the next 6 months, and it remained my attitude for the rest of my life. Right? Whenever I was learning, I always remember that my father got rid of the oven, sold the oven in the winter. In one of the coldest winters, he was willing to sell the oven so we could learn Torah. And this explains, Rabbi Dessler, is what the Medrash is telling us with the story. Yes, of course, there are a lot of people who want to accomplish something and they don't succeed. So the Medrash is telling us, how will you succeed? How will you succeed? So the Medrash tells us that Baruch the drunk, how did he get his alcohol? He got his alcohol, but how? So the Medrash tells us it happened after he sold his furniture to buy wine. After he sold every last penny that he owned. And he sold the furniture of his house to get wine. At that point, Hashem stepped in and gave him wine in the center. Right? And this is what the Medrash is telling everyone. Yes, there are a lot of things that we want to achieve. But how many of us are willing to sell our ovens in the winter, or maybe here in Miami? How many of us will sell our air conditioner, right? So that our children can study Torah.
My first year here, they seen the Van Brook, and we driving around without AC.
So how many of us would sell our air conditioner for us? And that's the secret. That's how we will succeed. Right? If we look at it as our oxygen, right? As something we need to live, we will become successful. And if this is true for Baruch the drunk, right? How much more so for every one of us that has a positive, a good goal that we want to achieve. We know that the Meruba Mida Branias, the measure of good is 500 times greater than negativity. So if Hashem is willing to do one miracle for Baruch the drunk so he can get his wine, Hashem will do at least 500 miracles for every one of us, right? So if we are willing to sell our furniture, if we're willing to sell our dishes and furniture to study Torah, if we're willing to lie on the roof under the snow to study Torah, if we're willing to not let a river stop us from doing a mitzvah, if we sell our furniture to give our children a good education, we sell our oven to give our children a good education, if we do everything we could to help others, right? The Medrash is telling us there's nothing that could stop us. Even if we're in the middle of a cemetery, in a grave in the middle of the cemetery, Hashem will send us wine. Right? Hashem will give us success. So l'chaim, we should all focus on positive goals, right? Not on wine in the cemetery, but on mitzvahs and Torah, and wherever we find ourselves. And if we really want it, and we look at it as if that's our oxygen and we cannot live without it, and we sell our oven and our furniture for it, Hashem will make sure we succeed. L'chaim.